I spent 30 years running a high school and a lifetime raising my only child, never expecting the day he would look me in the eye and coldly demand the keys to my own home. My name is Valerie. I am 62 years old. Just yesterday afternoon, my son Jamal stood right in my living room with an arrogant smirk on his face. He handed me a glossy brochure for a rundown assisted living facility on the edge of town, telling me it was time to move out so he and his wife could have the space they deserved. He stood there on my hardwood floors, looking down at the woman who sacrificed every luxury so he could graduate debt-free. Jamal thought he held all the power. He thought he was tossing aside a helpless old woman. What my son did not know was that the very ground he walked on and the lavish lifestyle he paraded around town were secretly funded and legally owned by the mother he was trying to throw away. I raised Jamal on my own. When his father walked out, leaving nothing but a mountain of bills and a broken promise, I looked at my baby boy and made a vow. I would not let the world break him. I was a high school principal, which sounds like a position of power, but the reality was a grueling marathon of early mornings and midnight paperwork. While other women my age were going on cruises or enjoying a Friday night out, I was sitting at my kitchen table, highlighting budget reports and stretching every paycheck to its absolute limit. I wore the same 3 sensible suits for a decade. I drove a reliable, boxy sedan that had over 100,000 miles on it. Every extra dollar I made went straight into Jamal's college fund. I wanted him to start his life without the heavy chains of student debt dragging him down. I missed out on vacations, dinners, and dating because my entire universe revolved around making sure my son had the best education and a solid foundation. And he did. He graduated from a top university, completely debt-free with a degree in finance. I sat in that crowded stadium, watching him walk across the stage, tears streaming down my face, believing that all my sleepless nights had finally paid off. I thought I had raised a man of honor, a man who understood the blood and sweat his mother shed to put that diploma in his hands. But looking back, I realize I shielded him too much. I gave him the world on a silver platter, and in doing so, I accidentally taught him that my sacrifices were simply his birthright. When Jamal married Chloe, I welcomed her with open arms. She was a beautiful young woman, but it became clear very quickly that she was obsessed with appearances. Chloe wanted the picture-perfect life, the country club memberships, the designer handbags, and a house that looked like it belonged on the cover of a magazine. To keep her happy, Jamal stretched himself dangerously thin. They bought a massive 5-bedroom house in a highly exclusive suburban neighborhood. He told me he got a promotion, but a mother's intuition never lies. I knew the numbers were not adding up. When the foreclosure notices secretly started arriving, I found out. Jamal was drowning, terrified of losing his perfect wife if he lost his perfect house. So I stepped in. I did not want to embarrass him or bruise his pride, so I used the wealth I had quietly accumulated through decades of smart real estate investments. I set up a blind trust, Valerie Holdings, LLC, and bought their mortgage outright. To Jamal and Chloe, it looked like a miraculous restructuring by a nameless corporate entity. They had no idea that the very roof over their heads was secured by my life savings. I let them live their luxurious illusion content to play the role of the modest retired mother, living in her simple, paid-off home across town. But my silent generosity was rewarded with nothing but disdain. As their fake lifestyle flourished, Chloe's disrespect toward me grew bolder. Whenever they visited my home, she would wrinkle her nose at my vintage sofa or make passive-aggressive comments about the neighborhood. She would look at my simple, comfortable clothes and suggest I visit a discount rack for a makeover, treating me like a charity case she was embarrassed to be seen with. Jamal just stood by, laughing nervously, never once defending the woman who gave him life. Then came her brother Wyatt. Wyatt was a fast-talking, slick real estate agent who always smelled heavily of cheap cologne and desperation. Whenever there was a family gathering at my house, Wyatt would spend the entire time pacing my property. He would tap the walls, measure my living room with his eyes, and loudly calculate how much my lot was worth if someone were to tear down my house and build a modern mansion. He looked at my home not as a place of love and memories, but as a carcass he was waiting to pick clean. He would corner me in my own kitchen, offering to take this old burden off my hands for a fraction of its true value. I bit my tongue. I swallowed my righteous anger every single time. I played the quiet, smiling elder, nodding along to keep the peace for the sake of my son. I endured their arrogant smirks and their patronizing pats on the back, telling myself it was just a phase. I never imagined that their arrogance was actually a calculated plot to strip me of everything I owned. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon when the heavy thud of the front door closing shattered my peace. I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter after baking a peach cobbler for the church bake sale. I had not expected any visitors. Then I heard the unmistakable click-clack of Chloe designer heels striking my hardwood floors. Right behind her was Jamal dragging his feet like a scolded child, and then Wyatt breathing loudly and already looking around the room as if calculating the square footage. They did not wait for an invitation. Chloe marched straight to my dining table, pulled out a chair, and dropped a thick manila folder right next to my cooling cobbler. Jamal could not even look me in the eye. He stared at the floorboards, while Wyatt leaned against my refrigerator with a smug, knowing grin. "Mum, we need to have a serious conversation," Jamal muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. "It is about your safety." "My safety?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. "I am perfectly fine, Jamal." Chloe let out a sharp, theatrical sigh, placing her perfectly manicured hands over mine. "Valerie, we love you, but we have to be realistic. You are getting older. You are becoming so forgetful. Just last week you forgot to lock the back door. It is not safe for you to be alone in a house this size." I stared at her, feeling a cold wave wash over my chest. I had not forgotten to lock the back door. I never forget to lock my doors. I realized in that exact moment they were building a narrative, a fictional story where I was a fragile, failing old woman. Wyatt pushed himself off the refrigerator and stepped forward, sliding a glossy brochure across the table. It was for a gloomy, state-funded assisted living facility on the industrial side of town, the kind of place where they put people and forget about them. "We found a great spot for you, Valerie," Wyatt chimed in, his voice slick and coated in fake sympathy. "They have nurses around the clock. You will make friends. And as for this property, well, Jamal and Chloe have agreed to sign the deed over to me. I can flip this place in a month, maximize the market value, and we can use a small portion of the profits to get you settled into your new room." I looked down at the documents Chloe had pulled from the folder. A transfer of deed. They had already filled out my name. They were sitting in the very house I had paid off with my own sweat, blood, and tears, calmly telling me they were taking it from me. My own son. The boy I sacrificed my youth to raise stood there in silence, letting his wife and her vulture of a brother strip me of my independence. I did not scream. I did not throw them out or flip the table, even though every instinct in my body demanded I unleash a mother-righteous fury. I knew from 30 years of handling unruly students and aggressive parents that the one who loses their temper loses the war. I looked at Jamal, truly looked at him, and saw nothing but a coward hiding behind his wife ambition. "I need a few days to read over these papers," I said, keeping my voice soft, letting my shoulders slump just enough to make them believe their gaslighting was working. "I am just so tired today. Let me rest and think about it." Chloe exchanged a triumphant look with Wyatt. "Of course, Valerie," she purred, patting my shoulder patronizingly. Take your time. We will be back on Friday for your signature. They turned and left as quickly as they had arrived. The house fell completely silent again, but the air felt heavy, tainted by their toxic entitlement. I walked over to the kitchen island to put away the cobbler, my hands trembling with a mixture of profound grief and boiling anger. That is when I saw it. Lying on the floor, right near the refrigerator where Wyatt had been leaning, was a small silver USB drive attached to a cheap leather keychain. It must have slipped out of his pocket when he reached for his phone. I stared at it for a long moment. My heart began to pound, a steady warning rhythm against my ribs. I picked it up. It felt heavy in my palm. A tiny piece of metal, holding the secrets they thought I was too old and naive to uncover. I walked to my home office, powered up my laptop, and plugged the drive in. The screen flickered to life. A folder popped up labeled simply Estate Planning. I clicked it. Inside was a digital mountain of deceit. There were spreadsheets, downloaded bank statements, and email threads between Chloe Wyatt and Jamal. But what caught my immediate attention was a subfolder titled Audio Notes. Wyatt apparently liked to record voice memos while he drove, mapping out his schemes out loud. I put on my reading glasses, clicked on the first audio file, and braced myself. Wyatt's sleazy, confident voice filled the quiet space of my office. He was talking to Chloe. The email threads were even worse. I opened a message from Chloe to Wyatt dated 3 months ago. She complained bitterly about the mortgage on their suburban house, talking about how they were drowning in debt because Jamal had taken out 3 hidden credit cards to pay for her country club dues and her luxury car lease. They owed nearly $80,000 in unsecured debt, and the creditors were threatening to sue. Their perfect, wealthy lifestyle was a complete fabrication and built on a house of cards that was rapidly collapsing. And right in the middle of this disaster, they had placed a target on my back. My home. The house I had scrubbed, painted, and loved for decades was nothing more than their bailout plan. I sat there in the glow of the computer screen, reading the clinical, heartless way they discussed liquidating my life. Wyatt had already lined up buyers. They had an appraiser ready to lowball the property so Wyatt could buy it cheap, flip it, and split the profits to cover Chloe and Jamal massive debts. They had mapped out every single step of my demise. Then I clicked on the final audio file. It was a recorded conference call between the 3 of them. I recognized my son's voice immediately, and the words that left his mouth struck me like a physical blow. Look, my mom is just taking up space in that big house anyway, Jamal said, his tone dripping with irritation. She does not need it. We will move her into that state facility, sell the property to Wyatt, and clear the credit cards before the bank seizes our cars. What if she refuses to sign the deed? Chloe asked, her voice sharp and calculating. Then we play dirty, Wyatt replied. I have a buddy who is a lawyer. We document her so-called memory loss. We say she is a danger to herself. We take her to court, declare her legally incompetent, and Jamal takes over as her conservator. Once he has power of attorney, we do not need her signature. We just take it. I sat frozen in my chair, my breath hitched in my throat. They were not just planning to steal my home, they were planning to steal my freedom, my mind, and my human dignity. They were willing to lock me away in a dreary institution and drug me into submission just to pay off Chloe designer bags and Jamal pathetic need to look rich. A single tear escaped my eye and rolled down my cheek, carrying the last ounce of unconditional, blinding motherly love I had left for the boy I raised. I wiped it away with the back of my hand. The sadness evaporated instantly, replaced by a cold, hard, terrifying clarity. I looked at the documents on my screen. I thought about the blind trust Valerie Holdings, the company that legally owned the very roof over Jamal and Chloe heads. They thought I was a fragile, forgetful old woman. They thought they held all the cards. I unplugged the USB drive and slipped it into my pocket. The time for crying was over. I was a high school principal who had managed thousands of unruly teenagers, manipulated budgets, and outsmarted city politicians. If they wanted to play a game of strategy, they were about to learn that they had challenged a master. They wanted to take my kingdom, but they forgot I was the one who built the castle. I picked up my smartphone and took a long, deep breath. I needed my hands to tremble just a little, to get my vocal cords to waver perfectly. I dialed Jamal's private number. When he answered, I let a heavy, exhausted sigh escape my lips. I told him he was absolutely right about my memory. I told him I was just so incredibly tired and that my mind was slipping away from me. I said that maybe the assisted living facility was the safest place for me to spend my final years. I promised him I would sign the transfer papers on Friday evening. My son sounded so relieved, almost giddy on the other end of the line. He told me I was making the best choice for the family, and that he loved me. As soon as I disconnected the call, the frail old woman vanished. I stood up straight, pulling my shoulders back. I walked into my home office and locked the heavy oak door behind me. I picked up the phone again, but this time my voice was sharp, commanding and steady. I called Gregory Sterling, a ruthless corporate attorney who billed by the minute and fought like a gladiator in a tailored suit. Gregory had helped me set up my blind trust years ago, and he knew exactly how much power I held. I told him we had a severe family emergency, and I needed him at my house on Friday at 7 p.m. sharp. He did not ask questions. He simply agreed. Next, I called my wealth manager, a brilliant financial strategist named Patricia, who handled the massive assets I had built from decades of smart property investments. I instructed Patricia to freeze all automated transfers immediately. I wanted every single financial lifeline severed without warning. I told her I needed a complete itemized portfolio of every dime that Valerie Holdings, LLC, had poured into Jamal and Chloe bank accounts over the last 4 years. I wanted every mortgage payment, every car note, every emergency wire transfer printed and bound in a solid leather folder. The betrayal tasted bitter in my mouth, but the adrenaline of taking back my power was intoxicating. I was a retired high school principal. I had stared down violent gang members, corrupt city councilmen, and furious parents. I was not going to let a spoiled son and his greedy in-laws strip me of my dignity without a fight. They wanted to play a game of manipulation, but they had no idea I was rewriting the rules. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in meticulous preparation. Patricia sent over the heavy financial dossiers via a secure private courier. I sat at my dining room table, the exact same table where I had fed my son countless meals and spread out the undeniable proof of my silent generosity and his colossal failure. First, so there was the master deed to their pristine suburban mansion. The crisp legal paperwork clearly stated that Valerie Holdings, LLC, held complete, absolute ownership of the property. They had been living in my house rent-free, playing pretend society elites, while I quietly absorbed the massive monthly cost. Then I pulled the payment histories for their vehicles. The luxury imported SUV Chloe paraded around town, and the sleek sports car Jamal drove to his expensive country club meetings were fully financed under my corporate accounts. I printed out every single receipt, every wire transfer, and every bank statement, highlighting the thousands of dollars I had bled to keep their sinking ship afloat. But paperwork alone was not enough for the kind of justice I demanded. Wyatt and Chloe were snakes, and snakes needed to be caught on tape committing the crime. I hired a private security technician to come to my house under the cover of night, so the neighbors would not pry. I paid him handsomely to install high-definition motion-activated cameras disguised as everyday objects. One tiny lens was hidden perfectly inside the smoke detector in my living room. Another was tucked neatly into a decorative vintage clock resting on the mantel. The third and most important camera was positioned inside a vase of artificial orchids, sitting right on my dining table. I wanted a front row seat to their extortion. I wanted to capture every arrogant smirk, every manipulative lie, and every illegal threat Wyatt dared to utter in my home. When the technician finished the installation, I tested the audio feed from my encrypted laptop. The sound was crystal clear, capturing even the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. I spent the remainder of Thursday organizing my files into two distinct folders. One thin manila folder held the fake transfer deed Wyatt had drawn up to steal my home. The other folder, a thick, heavy leather binder, held the absolute destruction of their fake lives. I placed the leather binder in the bottom drawer of my credenza, hidden away until the precise moment of execution. I looked around my quiet, peaceful home. The walls held the echoes of my struggles. The late nights grading papers, the tears I shed when I thought I could not make ends meet. I had built this sanctuary with my own two hands, scrubbing floors and saving pennies while Jamal slept safely upstairs. Nobody was going to take it from me. I had survived too much to be tossed out into the cold by a boy whose diapers I changed. The trap was fully set, and all I had to do now was wait for the rats to walk blindly into the cage. Friday evening arrived with a chilling, eerie calm. I set the dining table with my best floral china and polished silverware, preparing a lavish pot roast, just like I used to make when we celebrated Jamal's childhood achievements. At exactly 6:30, the doorbell rang, echoing through the quiet halls. I took a deep, steadying breath, letting my shoulders droop, and practiced a look of weary surrender before slowly opening the heavy front door. Jamal walked in first, holding a cheap bottle of red wine with a forced tight smile on his face. Chloe followed right behind him, practically bouncing on her heels, wearing a flashy designer dress I had unknowingly paid for. Wyatt trailed behind them, carrying his thick leather briefcase, flanked by a nervous-looking man, clutching a notary stamp. Wyatt introduced the stranger as his personal notary, a guy who clearly asked no questions, as long as he got his cut of the profit. They settled around my dining table with terrifying ease. Wyatt immediately unclasped his briefcase and pulled out the transfer documents, slapping them onto the pristine white tablecloth right next to my hidden camera vase. He smoothed the papers out with greedy, eager hands. Chloe poured herself a generous glass of wine, not even bothering to offer me one. She looked around my living room with a predatory glint in her pale eyes, already mentally measuring the space for the contractors they planned to bring in on Monday morning. Jamal kept his eyes averted, staring down at his expensive watch, completely detached from the reality that he was auctioning off his mother for a quick payout to cover his wife's shopping addiction. Wyatt tapped a gold pen against the table, grinning like a starved shark who had finally cornered its prey. He leaned forward, his cheap, overwhelming cologne completely masking the rich smell of the roast I had cooked. He spoke to me in that slow, patronizing tone people use on toddlers and the disabled. "We are going to make this quick and painless, Valerie," he said, sliding the heavy gold pen toward my trembling hand. "Just sign right here on the dotted line, and Jamal will take over from here. You will be safe in your new room by next weekend, and we will get this old place cleaned up and sold on the market." Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with fake sugary sweetness. "It is the absolute best thing for everyone, Valerie. You are just too confused to handle all these heavy responsibilities anymore. We are doing this out of pure love." I looked at the three of them sitting at my table. I saw the raw, unfiltered greed radiating from their pores. They genuinely thought they had outsmarted a tired, helpless elder. They believed they had woven the perfect, inescapable trap. I reached out with a shaking hand and picked up the gold pen. I let the metal tip hover over the signature line for a long, agonizing moment, watching Wyatt hold his breath in sheer anticipation. The silence in the room was thick, heavy with their vile entitlement. I looked at my son one last time, giving him a final, silent chance to stop this madness. But Jamal just looked away, taking a slow, cowardly sip of his wine. They had absolutely no idea the storm that was about to hit them. I held the heavy gold pen, feeling the cold metal warm against my skin. Wyatt leaned in so close I could smell the stale mint on his breath. "Just sign Valerie," he coaxed. "Make it easy on yourself." I looked down at the fraudulent deed. I looked at Chloe, trying to hide a smug smile behind her wine glass. And then I looked at Jamal. My own flesh and blood, staring at his shoes like a coward. I slowly set the pen down on the pristine tablecloth. "I do not think I will be signing this today," I said, my voice cutting through the heavy air. Before any of them could react, the sharp chime of my doorbell echoed through the house. I did not get up. I simply pressed the remote unlock button I kept in my apron pocket. Heavy, confident footsteps echoed down the hallway. Into my dining room walked Gregory Sterling, my corporate attorney, looking like a judge ready to pass a sentence. Right beside him was Patricia, my wealth manager, carrying the thick leather binder we had prepared. Wyatt stood up, his face flushing red. "Who are these people?" he demanded. Gregory did not even acknowledge him. He simply placed the heavy leather binder directly over Wyatt's fake deed. Valerie, Patricia said smoothly, "The asset freeze has been fully executed across all accounts. Every line of credit is officially cut off." I nodded and pulled my laptop from the credenza behind me. Jamal finally looked up, a confusion washing over his face. "Mum, what is going on? What are you doing?" "I am protecting my legacy, Jamal," I said, opening the leather binder. I slid a stack of bank statements across the table. "You three thought I was a senile old woman you could easily manipulate. You thought you could lock me away in a state facility and steal my home to pay off the $80,000 in credit card debt you have been hiding." Chloe choked on her wine, coughing and sputtering as the colour drained from her face. Wyatt slammed his hands on the table. "You have no idea what you are talking about, old lady. You are delusional." "Am I?" I asked quietly. I pressed play on my laptop. Wyatt's own voice filled the room loud and clear, detailing exactly how they planned to declare me legally incompetent, force me into an institution, and steal my property to cover their tracks. The absolute terror on their faces was a sight I will remember for the rest of my life. Chloe's hands shook so violently she dropped her wine glass, shattering it against my hardwood floor. But I was not finished. I pulled the master deed to their massive suburban mansion from the binder and handed it to my son. Jamal stared at the paper, his eyes wide with horror as he read the name of the holding company. Valerie Holdings, LLC. I am the sole owner of that company, Jamal. I bought your mortgage when you were drowning. I have been paying for your luxury lifestyle, your expensive imported vehicles, and the very roof over your head. You thought you were outsmarting a frail widow, but you were trying to scam your own landlord. I have frozen every account. There will be no more secret transfers to save your cars. There will be no more bailouts. The money supply is completely gone. The shady notary Wyatt had brought along did not wait to hear another word. He took one terrified look at Gregory, shoved his stamp back into his pocket, and practically sprinted out my front door, slamming it loudly behind him. He knew a doomed situation when he saw one. I turned my attention back to the people who thought they could destroy my life. Gregory calmly pulled 2 crisp legal documents from his briefcase and slid them across the table directly over the spilled red wine. "That is a formal 30-day eviction notice for your current residence," Gregory stated, his voice deep and completely devoid of any sympathy. "Since Valerie Holdings, LLC, legally owns the property, and you have consistently failed to meet your own financial obligations, you have exactly 1 month to pack your things and vacate the premises entirely." Chloe let out a piercing, hysterical shriek. She spun around to face Jamal, her carefully crafted mask completely dissolving into pure, unadulterated rage. "You promised me a wealthy lifestyle," she screamed, shoving him aggressively in the chest. "You told me you were a successful executive making 6 figures. You told me all of this was your money. You dragged me into this miserable nightmare, and now we are going to be completely homeless. I cannot believe I wasted my youth marrying a broke liar." Her true colours were finally shining bright under the dining room lights. She had never loved my son. She had only loved the glamorous illusion of wealth I had been secretly providing to keep him happy. Jamal stood there silently absorbing her vicious words, looking completely hollowed out and shattered. Seeing things unravel, Wyatt tried to grab his leather briefcase and slip out the back door, but Gregory raised a commanding hand to stop him. "Not so fast, Wyatt. My legal firm has already forwarded the pristine audio recordings of your little extortion plot directly to the State Real Estate Licensing Board, along with a formal complaint to your managing broker. Conspiring to declare an elderly property owner mentally incompetent in order to fraudulently seize and flip her home is a very serious felony. You will be extraordinarily lucky if you only lose your professional license and do not end up spending the next few years facing a judge in a criminal court." Wyatt turned as pale as a ghost, his slick, arrogant confidence completely evaporating as the crushing reality of his ruined career and impending legal battles crashed down heavily onto his shoulders. Jamal finally realized the magnitude of his colossal mistake. He dropped to his knees right there on my dining room floor, grabbing the hem of my skirt. "Mum, please," he begged, tears streaming down his face. "I am so sorry. I was desperate. Chloe was threatening to leave me, and I did not know what else to do. Please, you have to forgive me." I looked down at the boy I had raised, the boy I had scrubbed floors and skipped meals for. He had been willing to trade his mother unconditional love, my safety and my sanity, just to appease a manipulative wife who was now screaming insults at him. I gently pulled my skirt from his grasp and took a deliberate step back. I stood tall, feeling the quiet, unbothered strength of a woman who had weathered every storm life had thrown at her. "I forgive you, Jamal," I said, my voice steady and unwavering, "because holding on to anger will only poison my peace. But I will never again allow you to mistreat me or use me. You made your choice when you brought these vultures into my home and plotted my destruction. Now you must live with the consequences of your greed." I looked at the 3 of them, a pathetic tableau of ruined entitlement. "Pack up your fake deed and get out of my house," I commanded. I turned my back on them and walked toward my kitchen, leaving my son crying on the floor to face the absolute devastation of his own making. I had reclaimed my crown, and no one would ever try to take it from me again. I sit here today, sipping my tea in the very home they tried to steal from me, feeling lighter than I have in years. I want to tell everyone listening right now that a motherly love is a powerful, beautiful thing, but it should never ever mean becoming a doormat for your children. We spend our whole lives building them up, but the very moment they try to tear you down, you have to draw a hard, firm line. True peace only comes from removing toxic people from your life, even if they happen to share your own blood. You must always protect your peace and your legacy at all costs. Now, I really want to hear from you, my wonderful listeners. If you were in my shoes, would you have handed them the eviction notice or let them drown in their own debt first? Please drop a comment down below. Tell me exactly where you are watching from and what time it is in your beautiful city today. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and share this story with a strong queen who needs to hear it right now. Stay blessed and never let anyone dim your bright light.